I never thought much about Ryan's dad. At least, not in the way I was about to. Ryan and I had been best friends since high school, inseparable in a way that made people joke we were brothers. He was the kind of guy who could charm his way through life. Carefree, always laughing, always surrounded by people. His house had been a second home to me for years, a place where I could crash on the couch, raid the fridge, and exist without judgment. His dad, Mr. Carter, was always around, but I'd never given him much attention. Until that evening. Ryan had texted me earlier, telling me to come over. He had to run an errand, but the house was open, as usual. I was used to walking in without knocking, so I did. The moment I stepped inside, I felt something was different. The house was too quiet. "Ryan?" I called, shutting the door behind me. No answer. Then from the kitchen, a deep voice. "He's not home yet." I turned, and there he was, Mr. Carter, leaning against the kitchen counter with a glass in hand. He wasn't dressed like a dad who had just come from work. No stiff button-down or tie. Just a fitted black t-shirt, dark jeans, and bare feet. I noticed for the first time that he was in better shape than most guys my age. Defined arms, a strong chest, a posture that exuded quiet confidence. "You can wait if you want," he said, taking a sip from his glass. "I'm sure he won't be long." There was something about the way he looked at me, an appraisal, not just polite acknowledgement. I told myself I was imagining things. I nodded, setting my bag down. "Yeah, I'll just chill here." He smirked. "Make yourself at home, like you always do." I walked into the living room, flopping onto the couch, but I could feel his presence even after he'd turned away. It was unsettling, not in a bad way, but in a way that made my skin buzz with awareness. Minutes passed. The air between us thickened. "You want something to drink?" he asked, appearing at the edge of the room. "I'm good. Suit yourself." He crossed the space between us and sat down on the opposite end of the couch. Not too close, but not far enough either. For the first time, I really looked at him. The sharp jawline, the streaks of gray in his dark hair, the way his eyes, green, sharp, unreadable, seemed to watch everything without revealing much. "You and Ryan been up to anything interesting lately?" he asked, stretching his arm across the back of the couch. Casual, relaxed. "Not really. Just the usual. Work, gaming, the occasional party." He nodded, watching me, the corners of his mouth twitching like he wanted to say something else. Then, finally, "You ever think about the future?" The question caught me off guard. Yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't have a 5-year plan or anything." He chuckled, a deep, rich sound. "Most people don't. But you strike me as someone who thinks a lot. About things you don't say out loud." I swallowed. Something about the way he said it made my pulse pick up. "What makes you think that?" He tilted his head, considering. "Just an observation." There was a pause. A long one. A silence that felt deliberate. His gaze held mine, and I knew, in that moment, that I wasn't imagining anything. The air between us wasn't just thick, it was charged. I should have looked away. I should have laughed it off. But I didn't. Instead, I held his gaze, and something unspoken passed between us. The sound of the front door opening shattered the moment. Ryan's voice rang through the house. "Yo, you here?" I jerked back as if I'd been burned. Mr. Carter only smirked, slow and knowing, before rising to his feet. "Looks like your brother's home," he said, voice smooth, unreadable. And just like that, the moment was gone. But something had shifted, something I couldn't ignore, and I had no idea what to do about it. I told myself it was nothing, a look, a moment, a trick of my own restless imagination. But the thing about certain moments, about the way they pull at something unspoken inside you, is that they don't just disappear. They settle in the back of your mind, lingering like a song stuck on repeat. You tell yourself it didn't mean anything, but the thought still lingers, teasing, tempting. That was exactly how it was with Mr. Carter. For days after that evening, I couldn't shake the memory of how he'd looked at me. The smirk, the steady eye contact, the way his voice had dipped just enough to make me wonder if I was hearing things. It made no sense. He was my best friend's father, for God's sake. A man who had been around for years, who had watched Ryan and me grow up. There was no reason for me to be thinking about him the way I was. But I was. And the more I tried to suppress it, the more it crept into my thoughts. It wasn't long before I found myself at Ryan's house again. It wasn't unusual. I had been coming over for years, after all, but this time there was something different in the air. Something unspoken, thick with possibility. Ryan was in the backyard, setting up for a small get-together later that night. I had told him I'd help, but when I arrived, he waved me off. "Go inside, man. My dad's in there. Just say hey, or something. I'll be out here, setting up the lights." The casual mention of his father sent an inexplicable jolt through me, but I nodded, pretending like it didn't. Inside, the house was quiet. Warm lighting pooled across the hardwood floors, and the faint scent of aftershave and something smoky, whiskey, maybe, hung in the air. I moved toward the kitchen, my steps slower than usual, my pulse annoyingly uneven. And then I saw him. Mr. Carter stood near the counter, pouring a drink, his posture loose, at ease. He looked up at the sound of my footsteps, and the moment our eyes met, I felt that same charged pull from before. "You're here early," he said, his voice smooth. "Ryan told me to come in," I replied, standing at the threshold, suddenly unsure of what to do with my hands. His mouth twitched into a smirk. "Did he?" He took a sip of his drink, watching me over the rim of the glass, and for a split second, I wondered if he was testing me, seeing how I'd react. I should have made an excuse to leave. I should have turned around, walked out, done anything but stand there like an idiot, letting the silence between us stretch. Instead, I stepped forward. "Can I get a glass of water?" I asked, my voice betraying nothing. He nodded, reaching for a clean glass. But as he handed it to me, his fingers brushed against mine. A simple touch. Nothing meaningful, nothing that should have made my breath catch, but it did. I saw it in his face. The slight narrowing of his eyes. The way his fingers lingered a second too long before pulling away. This was real, and I had no idea what to do with that realization. I took a sip of water, if only to distract myself, and he leaned against the counter, studying me. "So, how's life treating you?" "Same as always," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "That's a shame," he murmured. "Someone like you should have more to say about life." The way he said it made my skin flush. There was something there, something between the lines, something unspoken, yet impossible to ignore. I set my glass down. "I should probably—" "You ever wonder what it would be like?" he interrupted. I froze. He took another sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving mine. "To do something you shouldn't. Something that breaks all the rules." My heart pounded. "What are you talking about?" His smirk deepened. "Just a thought." The silence that followed was suffocating. Every logical part of me screamed to get out, to leave, to pretend none of this was happening. But I didn't move. Not even when he reached out, slow and deliberate, brushing his fingers along the inside of my wrist. The touch was feather-light, barely there, but it sent a sharp jolt up my spine. I should have pulled away. I should have stopped this before it started. But when he leaned in, just enough to test the space between us, just enough to see if I'd back away, I didn't. And neither did he. The moment was razor-thin, balancing on the edge of something irreversible. Then, just as suddenly, the front door creaked open. Ryan's voice rang through the house. "Hey, you guys inside?" Mr. Carter stepped back smoothly, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just crossed a line we both knew couldn't be uncrossed. He picked up his glass, took another sip, and smirked. "Looks like the party's about to start." And just like that, the moment was gone. But something between us had already shifted, and I knew, deep down, that this wouldn't be the last time. I should have stopped. That moment in the kitchen, the almost touch, the unspoken challenge in Mr. Carter's eyes, I should have let it die there. Buried it beneath excuses and self-control. Let the weight of reality crush whatever dangerous thing had sparked between us. But I didn't. I told myself it was curiosity, a reckless thrill, something I could walk away from whenever I wanted. The next few weeks blurred into a dangerous rhythm. I found myself at Ryan's house more often than usual. At first, I told myself it was coincidence, an unplanned drop-in, an excuse to borrow something, a quick visit before heading somewhere else. But that was a lie. I was there because I wanted to be, because every time I stepped through that door, Mr. Carter was waiting. Not in an obvious way. There were no whispered promises, no stolen kisses in the dark. But there were looks, words that carried more meaning than they should have. The subtle game of push and pull, of seeing how close we could get before someone noticed. It was intoxicating, and it was bound to fall apart. The night it all came crashing down, the house was full of people. Ryan had invited a group over, some old friends, a few new ones. Music hummed low through the speakers, and the scent of beer and cheap cologne clung to the air. Laughter echoed from the backyard, where most of the party had gathered. I should have stayed outside. Instead, I found myself slipping back into the house, drawn by something I didn't want to name. And there he was. Mr. Carter stood by the dimly lit kitchen, half hidden in the shadows. His eyes found mine instantly, a silent recognition passing between us. I felt my pulse quicken, the now familiar rush of something I should have feared but didn't. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The house was alive with noise, but the space between us was its own quiet world. I took a step closer. So did he. A breath. A hesitation. Then, he reached for me. It wasn't an accident this time. His fingers brushed against my jaw, lingering in a way that made my skin burn. My breath caught in my throat. The heat between us was undeniable now. Undeniable and completely, utterly wrong. And then, "Are you serious?" The voice, sharp and full of disbelief, cut through the moment like a blade. I jerked away. Ryan stood in the doorway, his face a mix of shock and something worse, something that made my stomach drop. Betrayal. He had seen everything. The silence that followed was suffocating. Ryan's expression shifted from disbelief to anger. His jaw clenched so tightly, I thought he might break his teeth. "Tell me I didn't just see that." "Ryan," I started, but the words felt useless. He turned to his father, his voice cold. "Are you kidding me right now?" Mr. Carter, to my astonishment, didn't look guilty. He didn't even look surprised. Instead, he let out a slow exhale, setting his glass down on the counter. "Ryan, let's not do this here," he said, voice steady. "Let's not." Ryan let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Are you actually serious right now? My best friend? My dad?" I felt sick. This was never supposed to happen. Ryan's eyes flicked back to me, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw something break. "You knew," he said, his voice quieter now, but no less sharp. "You knew what you were doing." I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but no words came. What excuse could I give? What could possibly make this right? Ryan didn't wait for an answer. He let out a breath, gave me one last look, one filled with so much hurt it made my chest ache, then turned and walked out. I moved to follow, but Mr. Carter caught my wrist, his grip firm. "Give him space." I yanked my arm free. "You don't get to tell me that." The weight of everything, the secrecy, the tension, the guilt, came crashing down all at once. The reality of what I had done, of what we had done, was finally unbearable. Without another word, I left. Ryan never spoke to me again. Not that night. Not the next day. Not ever. I tried. At first, I sent texts that were left unanswered. Knocked on his door, only to be met with silence. Eventually, I got the message. Some things couldn't be forgiven. As for Mr. Carter, I never saw him again after that night. He made no effort to reach out, and I didn't either. Maybe he had always known it would end this way. Maybe, for him, it had never been anything more than a game. But for me, it was a mistake I would carry for the rest of my life. A lesson in temptation. In consequence. In losing something that could never be replaced.